Alright, I made a shorter video describing this very quickly and had a few questions, so I figured I'd address it in this video and kind of take our time, and I'll go through each step of what we're working with today. So first I'm going to describe the situation. So I had a 2017 GMC Terrain in here a week or so ago that this computer circuit here. So this is the serial enable data, or the enable serial data circuit. So how this works is it gets power from here to the body control module. This one here gets switched on when the ignition is switched on to switch a 12 volt wake up signal to this module, this module, this module, and this module. Today, we're going to simulate this module, or the electronic brake control module. So how this normally works is this is a low current 12 volt signal to wake up these modules. So there's never very much current on this circuit. So the computer puts out 12 volts here, and what was happening on this vehicle is the computer would put out 12 volts, it would sense excessive current draw on this circuit, and then shut that driver off. So we know we're chasing a short to ground. We used an amp clamp to verify our short to ground. Actually I used an amp clamp and a back probe here at the BCM to prove when it sets the code there's more current than what's acceptable on this circuit, and the BCM is putting voltage out until it sets the code. So how I deal with this circuit is I'll isolate it from the BCM, feed power into this circuit using a current limiting resistor or a test light of sorts like this one. Most of the time I jump right to a 4 amp test light, which is just an old school headlight bulb like that, and here I've got two of them wired in parallel. So this is a 55 watt bulb, that's a 55 watt bulb. So about 4 amps from each bulb wired in parallel gives me a total of 8 amps. Now depending on the circuit, this may be excessive. In this circuit, it is excessive. So I just use the one 4 amp bulb here. So we isolated this from the BCM, and what I did is had the positive here feeding from battery supply, and the negative feeding into this circuit here. So what that does is that puts this 4 amp bulb in series with the rest of this circuit, which means if it's shorted to ground anywhere, it would pull that ground side of my light low, causing my bulb to light. So just like this, if this gets grounded here, it pulls the voltage low, this light lights. All right, so what I would normally do is do that. The bulb would light because there is a short to ground, and then I would take my time to chase it down. And let me demonstrate that really quickly here. I will take this very, very thin wire here, place it across here, and now you can see that bulb's on because I'm pulling the voltage low here. This bulb's off because there's no difference in voltage from here to make current flow across that bulb. I hope that makes sense to you. So now that I have a bulb lit in place of a fuse, now I can go unplug components, wiggle and jiggle harnesses, and try to make this bulb go out and get rid of my short to ground if I've sized it appropriately for the circuit. And to give you an example of that, if this was a 10 amp circuit, and actually we'll just take that right off of there. So if this was a 10 amp circuit, I may use 8 amps to load it appropriately. And if that's the case, chances are when I find the short to ground, the rest of the components, just like that, will light back up and start working. Because the short to ground is no longer pulling the voltage low here. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to run you through, this is what the diagram looks like. So when there's 12 volts put out here, Now the same with this computer circuit. If it's a short to ground, it's not going to blow a fuse. Not typically. What's going to happen is it's just going to shut the driver off. Well, we're going to simulate that with this test light. So right now the driver's on. There's 12 volts here. Okay. So here's my note. It says the computer circuit's 12 volt wake up, limited to 250 milliamps. Anything over 250 milliamps, the voltage goes low here, the bulb lights. So the bulb's on, we have a short to ground or an overcurrent on our driver. So we know that's not the case here because our component, which we're going to pretend this is an ECU or the electronic brake control module. So when the light is on, we have a wake-up signal at our module. So hopefully that makes sense. And then we're grounded here. So this is our ground bus. This is our B+ bus here. And the computer, which is this, gets its power all the way here from the battery or the power distribution center here. So here's our power supply. So you can see I have my test light, which is our computer, hooked up to here. And then I have our positive ran to this bus, and our ground run all the way over here to the ground on our power source. So hopefully this makes sense that we have this is a simulated computer driver putting 12 volts out to our pretend computer, and our computer is getting the wake-up signal. So right now the circuit is working normally. So now what I wanted to show you is how I inadvertently fixed the vehicle and knew exactly what to go after. So first thing we need to do is bring our short to ground back. So now we have a short to ground. You can see our wake-up signal is getting pulled low, so our brake control module is not going to wake up. Our driver in the computer is getting pulled low, so our driver says there's a fault. We have a code in there. Our light's lit real bright, and we don't have 12 volts there. So we know we have a short to ground from here this way. It could be through the module. We don't know that. But we do know we have a short to ground somewhere. So what I'm going to do is isolate this point typically. Just for the sake of the video and simplicity, we're not going to isolate this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed an additional 12 volt source here that can handle much higher current, but is also current limited, so I'm not just blowing fuses or running as much current as I can through this circuit. Because if I run too much current through this circuit, I might start a fire, and we don't want to do that. And if you have a short to ground, it's very likely that if you just ran a full 12 volts, like if I just took a 12 volt jumper wire, clipped it here or on my bus, and right here, just direct, we would start a fire or blow a fuse. So we don't want to do that. That'd be silly and a very difficult way to chase a short to ground because we're going to go through a ton of fuses, and we don't want to do that. So what we usually do is we'll take our headlamps, and for this case we are going to use both of these in parallel, so that way we have 8 amps, because that's what it's going to take to burn our ground. So here you can see on this diagram we have an inline connector here, here, and here. So by hooking up a 4 amp test light here and allowing 4 amps to flow through this circuit, which is way higher than the computer would ever put through there, when we do that, if the short to ground is something like high resistance to ground through a connector like this, an inline connector, sometimes they'll have corrosion across the pins, and that's enough to pull that computer circuit low, because the computer circuit might only put out 200 or 300 milliamps, so it's enough to flag a short to ground in the computer. But as soon as we put our 4 amps through it, it's going to burn that corrosion trace out, and now everything's going to be okay. And we did find on this inline connector right here, we actually did find the corrosion that we were looking for after we blew it out with the headlight bulb. So I'm just going to show you how we can blow out that short to ground accidentally and maybe not understand why. So, because you got to remember, the short to ground and all this other stuff is in a car, so it's just buried in tons of extra plastic and nonsense, or in body panels, or in inline connectors under the car. So we're not going to see this like we see it here. So again, we're going to take our modified high current test light, which is, you can see just all the positives are ran together, so they're in parallel. And this is my feed for both the bulbs. All the grounds are ran together, so they're in parallel. This is my ground for both the bulbs. So there will be 8 amps flowing across this circuit and no more. So if I have feed here and 0 volts here, we'll have 8 amps. Anything less, we'll have less. So that's why we're using these, is so we don't overcurrent the circuit and start a fire, but we can still know that we have a short to ground and then track it down. So now we're going to put power to our bulbs, and I want to show you guys just with it grounded, both bulbs light. So normally that's how we would do it. We would put this right on our feed, both bulbs would light, and then we'd go look for our problem, whether we're unplugging each component or unplugging each inline connector or wiggling the harness, whatever it takes to find the short to ground. But in this case, when I hooked this up to my output, the short to ground went away. And that's what I want to show you guys. So hopefully that all makes sense. So then this can continue to make sense when I hook this up here. So we know it's shorted to ground right now because that's lit. Our output isn't lit. So our wake up signal at our brake control module is 0. Our output says we have a fault. So when I put this on the output, get that clamped on there, when I get that on the output, now we have a huge short to ground, right? Because we're pulling 8 amps, all of that, and we're still not, we still haven't blown out our short to ground. And you don't ever want to set this up with the intention of blowing out your short to ground, because you may start a fire. So you don't want to do this. This is something that happens inadvertently, occasionally, when you're chasing a short to ground. So you don't ever want to make this happen. You want to actually find your short to ground because you want to fix the vehicle. But you can see even this thin little piece of wire here, it's starting to get hot. But even that is handling 8 amps, reasonably well. But we're just going to touch this here and try to melt that quick. Well, alright, so we're just for fun, I'm going to short that so you guys can see it burn. But imagine that took only 3 amps to burn. So if that only took 3 amps to burn, it would look like this. So you can see it burnt that short to ground, and now we have our headlamps set up still here, and you can see our output is working because our bulb is off. So there's no more fault here, and our brake control module is getting its wake up signal. So we inadvertently burnt out our short to ground, and if all this is buried and all you did was hook up your headlamp to the output, and then all of a sudden your headlamp didn't light, and then you check it and now it's not shorted to ground and your outputs all work, you probably blew out some corrosion in an inline connector. That's usually what I'll find. Sometimes you will find just a strand on a crimp touching ground, or a chafed harness. I don't really have a chafed harness sitting up here, but like a chafed harness that might just be rubbing just against the corner of a bracket, and hitting it with high current was enough to push it off of there. So you still want to chase down your source or your problem, but if you inadvertently fix the short to ground, you're looking for probably some corrosion or a very subtle issue that may never come back. But now at least you can go check all your inline connectors for corrosion, and you know what you might find. I've had this happen, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times over my career, and every single time I'll find a corroded inline connector like this, or big body connectors sometimes that have 60 pins in them, and a big lever lock on them. Sometimes those will be full of corrosion. You'll get weird stuff like this. So I just want to demonstrate how I got there, and how the not excessive current, but how loading a circuit to find a short to ground, you may actually inadvertently fix the short to ground, but it's not a very likely situation, so when it happens, it might throw you for a loop. So I hope all this makes sense. I'm just going to go over the setup again really quick so you can kind of see. So the test lights ran from power over to here. That's our simulated computer output, and that's going to this test light, which is our simulated electronic brake control module wake-up circuit. And this is our ground bus, and our short to ground was just a piece of wire laid across here. So video's been going a while. I hope that makes sense to you. I really hate to hammer these to death, especially for the people that get them, but let's see if we can get that shorted to ground again. There we go. So I got that wire on there, shorted to ground again. You see how it's turning red hot? And as soon as I take away the additional current from the bulb, it's not red hot. We're still shorted to ground. So normally how I would do this, we're just gonna power this with one light. So right now I know it's shorted, and we're just gonna power this with one headlamp. So that's 4 amps running through the circuit. So then I would just go and disconnect things like that inline connector, that inline connector, that inline connector, or maybe I'd go right to the modules, whatever's easier. And then or I'd be going along and I'd wiggle and jiggle a harness, and oh, the short's fixed. My headlamp went off. Now I can really pay attention to where I wiggled the harness, where I jiggled it, and see if I can find the short to ground that's causing the issue. So you can see that there. Let me see if I can get that back. Yeah, once the wire tarnishes, sometimes it won't make another connection. But anyway, hopefully you get the point. I just want to make this longer video to kind of explain how I got there and all the steps, because I know I rushed through it in the little 3-minute video I made. So hopefully this all makes sense to you, helps you understand electricity and the way current flows, and why the resistances of the bulbs matter, why the current flow allowed to flow through a bulb matters so much, and why it's important to understand this stuff if you're going to do this kind of testing. And if you don't understand this stuff, don't do this kind of testing. This is why you pay a professional. The guys that do this every day understand it at this level, and this is easy stuff. So if you put the time in, you put the practice in, you can get good enough so you can understand what's happening in a circuit, even when something non-intuitive happens, like you hook up a test lamp to load the circuit and the problem goes away. So now you can have kind of an idea of why. But anyway, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Have a great day.